And now it's time for us to discuss more of these headlines and simple keywords. Adam joining us via Zoom. Good morning, Adam.
Good morning, Lena. Happy hump day.
Happy Wednesday, the halfway point. The glass is half full.
The halfway point. It certainly is half full, yes.
I like to force answers out of my guests. Thanks for joining us.
Happy to be here.
All right, we're going to take a closer look at some of the major headlines, starting with our first keyword of the day.
Japan trip.
So President Yoon will travel to Japan for talks tomorrow with Prime Minister Fumio Kishida. Many eyes will be on the first trip by a Korean president to Japan in 4 years. Expectations run high. Could it thaw our relationship? What can we expect?
Right. It is the first visit to Japan by a Korean president in 4 years, but it's also the first time in 12 years, actually, that a Korean president will be attending a bilateral summit in Japan. So an official state visit. So it's been more than a decade. Now, the last was between the former president Lee Myung-bak and former Prime Minister Yoshihiko Noda. That was back in December 2011. Now, Yoon will be in Japan for 2 days. Now, on the first day, he will have a luncheon meeting with Korean compatriots, followed by this much reported summit with Kishida. The summit will be followed by a dinner, interestingly, with omurice on the menu. Many reports are suggesting it's omurice diplomacy that's going to be happening this week.
Sure.
And apparently, Yoon made the request for omurice himself at a very famous restaurant in Ginza in Tokyo, where they have a very nice omurice, apparently. I've never been myself, but I certainly
Now I'm just hungry.
Well, I will certainly be putting it on a list of places to go the next time I visit Japan. Now, as for the summit itself, the two leaders will discuss normalization measures for the overall Korea-Japan relationship, according to the top office. That includes the implementation of the solution to the issue of forced labor, this very controversial solution that the government came up with. That's faced a lot of backlash from the forced labor victims as well as related civic groups. The two leaders will also likely talk about ways to resolve the policy barriers hampering economic cooperation and discuss further ways to cooperate on the economy front. The top office says the trip will signal the beginning of a normalization of ties that will start in earnest. Seoul hopes the trip will pave the way for an array of pending issues to be solved between the two countries, of which there are many. The two leaders are also expected to discuss Japan's export restrictions on key items used in the making of semiconductors, as well as Japan's removal of South Korea from Tokyo's so-called white list of trading partners. They are also expected to discuss Korea's response, which includes filing a complaint against Japan to the World Trade Organization, of which that has been suspended for the time being. On the second day of the visit, Yoon will meet with members from the Japan-Korea Parliamentarians Union, which promotes exchanges and friendship between the two countries, as well as the Korea-Japan Cooperation Committee, which is in charge of private exchanges as well. The meeting will be attended by former Prime Ministers Tada Aso and Yoshihide Suga. Yoon also plans to support economic exchanges by attending a Korea-Japan business roundtable luncheon with key business leaders from both countries. So Yoon will be quite full, I expect, by the end of his 2-day trip. A lot of luncheons and dinners in store. Now, the tycoons are expected to discuss the tentatively called Future Youth Fund, which was created in relation to that compensation plan for victims of forced labor. Again, yet another controversial aspect to the matter. In the late afternoon, Yoon will return to Korea after giving a lecture at Keio University for Japanese and Korean students. Japanese media reports, meanwhile, that Kishida is also considering visiting Korea after hosting the G7 summit in Hiroshima in May. Reports suggest the visit could happen sometime in the summer. So we'll have to see if that visit from Kishida to Korea is realized.
And of course, at G7 Summit, we'll keep tabs on that. Let's move on. In the meantime, our coverage of the labor reform. This is our second keyword of the day.
Reforming reform.
So President Yoon has ordered his government to re-examine a proposal plan to reform the 52-hour workweek, hence reforming the proposed reform. This comes amid criticism that the proposed revision has stopped short of reflecting the voices of the younger generation. I mean, we talk about why we group millennials and Gen Z into one. It's because we eventually will become the most powerful consumers. We'll be the ones in the workforce longer, and therefore, yes, ideally, the reform should consider the voices of the young people, but can a single reform policy please everyone? I don't think so.
Yeah, I mean, President Yoon certainly isn't getting a break at the moment. So a lot of the policies that he's outlined recently is facing a lot of backlash, including this one. Now, the MZ and Gen Z members are barking at the idea that many saw as destroying a healthy work-life balance. Ironic, because that policy to revise the 52-hour work week was indeed to try and promote work-life balance. But laborers, as well as several experts, claim that employees will be forced to work longer hours, while longer vacations can barely be guaranteed, as stated in the government's revision. Now, the revision to the 52-hour work week essentially allowed for 69 hours of work a week. Yoon ordered the government to re-examine that proposal itself and its communication with the public to seek improvements to it. Yoon also ordered the government to take various employees' opinions, especially among younger generations, before submitting the plan to the National Assembly for approval. The top office said a poll over the plan will take place before the approval is granted as well. But Yoon did maintain that the proposal is meant to strengthen workers' rights. Now, the Labour Ministry has sought to solicit public opinion until April 13th and put the proposal to Parliament by no later than July. We could see that timeline be delayed after Yoon's instructions. Now, Prime Minister Han Duck-soo later told reporters Yoon's instruction was not meant to fully reconsider the proposed work week system. He said nothing has changed in the original frame, which basically is giving more people flexibility to work maybe longer hours in the week and take longer times off in a later period.
Right.
But of course, the younger people are saying, well, that's all well and good, but employers aren't giving us that time off, basically. So essentially, in the extreme sense, they say that it's not 69 hours, but it could be up to 80 plus hours a week if the plan is implemented. Now, the Prime Minister vowed to keenly monitor issues facing labourers and react strongly against any cases involving delays in the payment of wages or overtime pay, as well as employers' refusal to give break times for workers as well.
And of course, I mean, we have to consider the fact that why fundamentally someone would want to work overtime. Not everyone, desires to have the same paycheck and the same vacation. Some, it's work-life balance. Others just want a bigger paycheck altogether. So how do we please these differing views? And also, I just want to point out, maybe ideally, at the end of the day, it should be between the employer and the employee and not just about the regulation. That's just a framework, isn't it?
All right. It is just a framework indeed. But there are concerns that people will just be working overtime to get more money without realizing that it can be detrimental to their health as well. But of course, it's all down to choice at the end of the day and what agreements, as you say, are made between employees and employers.
So for now, labor reform, a work in progress. All right, on to our third keyword of the day.
More missiles.
And therefore, it was a rather hectic morning for the news team yesterday. North Korea has fired 2 short-range ballistic missiles towards the EC in the second provocation over just a few days. It also comes a day after South Korea and the United States kicked off that regular military exercise. What's the latest, Adam?
Right, so this was all expected. More provocations from North Korea amid this Freedom Shield exercises that's going on at the moment. The missiles launched from the southwestern coastal town of Changyeon on Tuesday. Both missiles traveled about 620 kilometers. It's actually the first time, apparently, that missiles have been flown from that area in North Korea, in South Hamgyong province. And now the reported flight distances suggest the missiles target South Korea. South Korea's military called the launches a grave provocation that undermines stability on the Korean peninsula and a clear violation of UN Security Council resolutions. So your usual responses from South Korea. It also urged the North to immediately stop such launches as well. And the intelligence authorities of South Korea and the US are conducting a comprehensive analysis of the specifics of the missiles. The Joint Chiefs of Staff added that it will track and monitor North Korean movements to see if there is a possibility of additional provocations. There are expectations that more weapons testing could be done during the military exercises. Now, the top nuclear envoys, meanwhile, of South Korea and the US have also discussed ways to respond to future North Korean provocations. The officials emphasized the North must realize that it has nothing to gain from such provocations and that there is a price to pay. Tuesday's call between them comes only a day, actually, after the envoys talked on the phone to assess conditions on the Korean Peninsula. So it's their second phone talks in as many days.
All right, with that, we move on to our fourth keyword of the day.
SVB impact.
So the Silicon Valley Bank collapse seemed to have a limited impact on the Korean financial market, but the stock market was down after yesterday's close. What's the latest, Adam?
Right, so the initial reaction was, well, it's not doing much, but then the day after, which is yesterday, it certainly seemed to weigh in on the investor sentiments. Now, the Kospi dropped more than 2.5%, which is actually the biggest fall so far this year. Investors remain wary about the fallout from the collapse of SVB, as well as the New York-based Signature Bank as well. So there's two US banks that have collapsed. This spans sell-offs by foreign and institutional investors. Foreigners dumped a net 638 billion won. Investors are also bracing for uncertainties about the US Fed's pace of monetary tightening in the wake of the bank's collapses. Some expect the Fed to slow its tightening pace on worries that the collapses may lead to a systemic risk in the financial sector. But Seoul's finance minister said authorities will closely monitor the markets. Analysts say stock plunges in the US and Europe seem to have belatedly stirred anxiety here in the local market as well as across Asia as well. The local currency was also down about 9 won from the previous close. And the collapses have also led to increased calls to bolster Korea's state-led deposit insurance coverage policy as well. And commercial banks are also keeping a watchful eye on the developments. Overall stocks worldwide, meanwhile, suffered losses worth around 600 trillion won due to the fallout of the bankruptcies. Asia Pacific's leading index, meanwhile, erased its year-to-date gains and is now flat in 2023 as bank stocks led declines. The slumping shares comes despite reassurances from the US President Joe Biden that America's financial system is safe. Biden also said his administration is taking action to contain SVB's collapse. So he's trying to kind of downplay the impact and repercussions of the collapses. But investors are, of course, jittery nonetheless.
Investor confidence is down despite President Biden's promise that their money is safe. We'll leave it there for now so we can move on to our final keyword of the day.
New airport.
So the opening date for a new offshore airport to be built in Kadok Island has been pushed up to December 2029 in hopes of accommodating a successful bid by Busan to host the 2030 World Expo.
Right, so Korea is certainly pushing hard and trying to get Busan to host the expo in 2030. And the airport construction is about 5.5 years faster than originally planned. Now, the government will begin work on the new international airport that is near Busan in 2024. The move aims to help Busan win its bid for the expo. The city is in a fierce competition with Riyadh, Rome, and Odessa, with the most fierce competition likely to be with Riyadh at the moment. Now, contrary to the optimal plan put forth during the feasibility study, which called for building the entire airport on an artificial island, the new plan entails an airport that spans both land and sea. Now, the plan calls for the use of reclaimed land to build the runway, which the government said was safer and cheaper than the other two options under consideration, which is a floating runway or building the runway on a pier. Now, the government also said that with no examples of large-scale floating runways anywhere in the world, preparations to build a floating runway would take too long. Of course, that will go against the planned shrinking of the timeline. Now, the passenger terminal will be built on land, while the airstrip will be built over the sea. The study found that construction could be shortened by 27 months if work on the passenger terminal begins early. The government, meanwhile, said it will adopt other proposals, including the use of new technologies to further shorten construction time as well. So it seems like the Korean government is still pushing hard for that bid for Busan to host the World Expo. And of course, it is a World Expo, so you need the appropriate transport means for people from across the world to come to the city.
More accommodations. All right. Thank you very much, Adam, for today's coverage. We'll see you tomorrow.
You're very welcome. See you tomorrow.
If you're listening to our program using the podcast service, just a reminder that we do go live Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. Korea Standard Time. So tune in and help us make the show more informative by giving us your input. See you bright and early on Good Morning Seoul.